Before the first word was ever spoken, before a single sound carried meaning between two human minds, something else existed. A tool, a weapon, sharp, deadly, and entirely intentional. Imagine a world where your group of hunters can coordinate, surround prey, signal danger, make a kill, and yet not one of them can say a single word. No names, no plans, no warnings in language, only gesture. Here is the bizarre truth they don't teach in school. The hand that shaped a killing weapon and the mouth that formed a word are products of the same brain. But the weapon came first, by hundreds of thousands of years. Neuroscientists studying aggression have identified something called the amygdala weapon loop, the idea that holding a weapon triggers measurable changes in threat perception and dominance behavior. The technology of killing was taught before anything else. Passed down. Refined. What is the first thing a child learns when they encounter an edge? They test it. They bleed. And they understand. This is the thing that should unsettle you. When these early hominids gathered around a fire at night, and they did, the evidence is unambiguous, they did not tell each other stories. They could not. They did not have the language for it. Psychologists who study preverbal trauma, the kind that happens before a child has language, describe a particular type of memory. It is stored not in narrative, not in story, but in the body. In posture. In reflex. Here is the question that archaeologists cannot fully answer, but neuroscientists have begun to explore. What does a mind dream about when it has no language? When there are no words for what happened today, when you cannot narrate the hunt or the loss or the fear, what comes at night? Every morning, they scan the horizon. Not for food first. For threats first. This is the survival sequence that weapons created, and that language, when it finally came, was shaped around. Watch what happens when no words exist between people who need to coordinate. The body takes over. The gesture. The glance. The angle of the chin. The hunt was the original team sport. And weapons were the first technology that required cooperation. Think about that. Before farming. Before pottery. Here is the bizarre and almost disturbing fact. The flint spear tip required more cognitive steps to manufacture than almost any other early human technology. You had to visualize the shape inside the raw stone before striking. You had to plan multiple steps ahead. There is a peculiar and chilling observation made by wildlife researchers studying both lions and early hominid fossil sites. At some point in prehistory, the exact timing is debated, the relationship between lions and hominids reversed. For millions of years, hominids were prey. Imagine the first time one of these creatures, a creature that had spent millions of years running from predators, chose to stand still and raise a weapon instead. Chose to say, without words, without a single sound, I am not prey. And here is where the psychology begins to fracture in an interesting direction. In every other social predator, wolves, chimpanzees, early hominid relatives, when a threat retreats, the tension releases. The nervous system resets. But in the species that had weapons, something different happened. Watch the face of someone who has just realized they are the most dangerous thing in the room. There is a specific expression, neuroscientists have documented it, that appears across cultures when dominance is established. It is not a smile. It is a stillness. A pulling inward. A recalibration. Kale's face holds that expression now. There is another strange fact hidden in the archaeology. The sites where we find the earliest and most sophisticated weapon manufacture are also the sites where we find the earliest evidence of intergroup violence. As the weapons got better, the violence within and between hominid groups increased. This is not coincidence. Tool maintenance was sacred. Not metaphorically, practically. A weapon in poor condition was a death sentence. So every day, significant cognitive and emotional energy went into assessing, repairing, and upgrading the killing tool. Think about what that does to a mind over time. What strikes researchers who study these ancient tool-making sites is the standardization. Across hundreds of thousands of years and thousands of miles of geography, the weapons were made to the same specifications. The same flaking techniques. The same proportions. This means the knowledge was being transmitted faithfully across generations. The psychology of learning to make a weapon is different from the psychology of learning almost anything else. Because the feedback is immediate and physical. Too much force, the stone breaks. Wrong angle, the edge is blunt. The material itself responds to your mistakes with total honesty. Here is one of the most disturbing patterns in the anthropological record. Across multiple early hominid sites, researchers find evidence of what they cautiously call intraspecific violence, members of the same species injuring and killing each other. What is remarkable is the timing. Dominance displays in social species are almost universal. What makes the hominid version unique is the role of the manufactured weapon in that display. Chimpanzees use size, volume, branch shaking. Early hominids used weapons, and the meaning of that shift is profound. Because a weapon is an equalizer. The submission display, the moment one individual withdraws from a confrontation, is as neurologically significant as the dominance display that preceded it. For the one who withdraws, there is a measurable drop in testosterone and a rise in cortisol. Stress hormones. The body records the loss as injury even when no physical contact occurred. There is a moment in the development of every young individual in a weapon-carrying social group when they make a critical psychological observation. They observe who has to step back. And they understand, without words, in the wordless language of the body, that the weapon is the reason. Here is a fact that makes archaeologists uncomfortable. In the sites where we find both sophisticated weapons and evidence of group living, the cooking fires, the shared sleeping areas, the early evidence of social bonding, we also find the highest concentrations of trauma injuries in fossilized bones. Healed fractures. The weapon carries meaning before language assigns it one. This is perhaps the most psychologically significant thing about the pre-linguistic weapon culture. An object that can kill accumulates a kind of wordless weight, a gravitational pull on attention, on behavior, on hierarchy. There is something almost ritualistic about the way early hominids maintained their weapons. The same motions. The same rhythmic sound. The same sequence of strokes, always at the same angle, always producing the same result. Ritual, repetitive, meaningful action, is thought by many anthropologists to predate language. Even in sleep, the hand does not leave the weapon. This is a documented behavior across cultures that carry weapons, even today. The body that has been shaped by the weapon retains its vigilance in sleep. The nervous system does not fully release. What is it like to be the one who watches while others sleep? What is it like to know, without words to frame the knowledge, that you are the only barrier between the sleeping group and the darkness outside? Joran does not have a word for duty. Does not have a word for sacrifice. The encounter between two armed groups who share no common language is one of the most psychologically compressed moments in human experience. Every signal is physical. Every message is carried in posture, in weapon position, in the pace of approach. The raised weapon, used as a signal rather than a threat, is one of the earliest forms of intentional symbolic communication we can identify. It says, I have this. I know you have that. Let us both understand what we are to each other before we take another step. Before a single word of trade, diplomacy, or alliance was ever spoken between two human groups, before the concept of these things had any verbal form, the negotiation was already happening. In the positioning of weapons. In the angles of bodies. In who stepped forward and who stepped back. Every step toward a stranger who carries a weapon is an act of extraordinary courage in a world without language. There is no way to say, I mean no harm. There is no word for peace. There is no gesture so unambiguous that it cannot be misread. Every approach is a gamble with your life. Trade. The first trades between hominid groups predate language. Archaeologists find evidence of materials, specific types of stone, specific pigments, specific shell ornaments, appearing far from their geological origin, meaning they traveled between groups. They were exchanged. Here is the strange psychology of the first gift between armed strangers. To give food to someone who has a weapon, to approach close enough to place something on the ground between you, is to accept, momentarily, that you are not going to use your weapon. It is a temporary suspension of threat. Archaeologists studying sites across Africa and Europe have found one of the most revealing patterns in the pre-linguistic weapon record. The quality of flint, the raw material, varies enormously by region. Some groups had access to extraordinary stone. Others had only poor-quality local rock. And the groups with the best stone? Joran has watched this before. Across a lifetime of encounters, the patterns have become legible without language. Who steps back? Who holds the weapon tightest? Who gives first? Who takes? The elder is the tribe's memory, not in words, not in story, but in the body's accumulated read of pattern. When the encounter ends and the strangers walk away, there is a particular kind of release that happens in the body. The cortisol drops. The muscles that have been held tight for hours begin to soften. And in that moment of release, something else arrives, what modern psychology calls post-threat processing. The replaying of the encounter. The reassessment. Did I read that correctly? The territorial instinct, the feeling of this is mine, is billions of years old in the animal nervous system. But in the species that made weapons, it found a new and devastating amplifier. The weapon didn't just protect a territory. It asserted it. It declared it. On a clear night 400,000 years ago, the sky above this cliff face looked exactly as it does here. The same stars. The same infinite dark. And a being sat at the mouth of a cave and watched the darkness with a weapon in hand, not because the being chose to, but because the nervous system that weapons had built demanded it. One of the most persistently underreported aspects of early hominid weapon culture is the role of female hominids in weapon manufacture. For decades, archaeologists assumed that the napping sites, the places where stone tools were made, were exclusively male domains. Recent reanalysis of grip patterns, bone wear, and tool size distribution at these sites suggests something different. The oldest marks we find on cave walls before formal art appears are not images of animals or abstract symbols. The oldest marks are weapon impressions. Spear tips pressed into soft surfaces. Cut marks, possibly from blades testing edges, on cave walls and bones and antler. The weapon training session was, we believe, the first formal educational institution in human prehistory. A space deliberately designated for the transfer of skill, survival critical, violence-inflected skill, from one generation to the next. Think about what this means structurally. The first school was a weapons range. The transmission of weapon skill required physical contact. You cannot learn the correct grip from description. You cannot learn the angle of a thrust from watching alone. The teacher must take the student's arm. Must apply pressure to the elbow. Must feel whether the muscle response is correct. Motor learning, the kind of learning that lives in muscle rather than in thought, is processed differently in the brain than cognitive learning. It goes deeper. It lasts longer. It is harder to unlearn. When the young hominid learns to hold the weapon correctly, the neural pathways that encode that knowledge are among the most durable the brain can produce. Imagination, the ability to mentally simulate events that have not yet happened, is one of the defining cognitive features of modern humanity. And researchers believe it may have been the weapon that first demanded this capacity. To hunt effectively, you must imagine the hunt before it happens. Cooperative hunting required a level of social coordination that was unprecedented in the animal kingdom. To surround a large prey animal, to time a simultaneous approach from multiple directions, to trust that the others in your group would hold their positions, this demanded a social sophistication that rivaled or exceeded anything else in the hominid cognitive repertoire. Patience is not a virtue we associate with our earliest ancestors. We think of prelinguistic hominids as impulsive, reactive, driven entirely by immediate need. But the hunt required patience of an extraordinary order. Waiting, perfectly still, for the right moment, sometimes for many minutes, required not just physical control but the suppression of every anxious impulse the nervous system produced. The moment of the throw is the moment everything changes. After hours of stillness and calculation and suppressed fear, the release. The spear leaves the hand and everything that was held tight releases with it. Neurologically, this moment is extraordinary. The prefrontal cortex, the thinking, planning, patient, waiting part of the brain, hands control back to the motor system, the reactive system, the ancient system. The post-hunt weapon check. It happens in every hunting culture, in every historical period, across every corner of the world where humans have hunted. The first act after a kill is the inspection of the weapon. Before gratitude. Before distribution of the food. Before rest. The weapon is checked and maintained. There is a particular kind of desire that prelinguistic minds are capable of that is not the desire for an object but the desire for a state of being that the object represents. RETH does not simply want the spear. RETH wants to be the one who holds the spear. Every successful hunt ended with a return. And in that return, in that walk back across the open land to the shelter where the rest of the group waited, something was being built that had no name yet. Community. The sense of coming back to a place and to beings who needed what you carried. The weapon made the return possible. The weapon made the food possible. The watchers and the returners. This is the oldest social division in human history. Those who go out, who carry the weapons into danger, and those who stay, who wait, who watch the horizon for the return. Both roles were shaped by the weapon. The ones who went out were defined by what they carried. Emotional recognition before language is one of the most studied and most humbling areas of human psychology. We know from infant studies that the capacity for emotional expression and reading far predates language. Babies as young as 2 months respond to emotional cues in faces with measurable neurological responses. Now extend this backward in time. These beings, these prelinguistic hominids, had full emotional lives. The shared feast after a successful hunt is the original social glue. Before religion, before law, before money, food shared around a fire between beings who had survived another day together. Anthropologists studying this behavior in modern hunter-gatherers consistently find that the distribution of food is never arbitrary. It is a complex social statement. Who gets the best portion? The moment of temptation around the weapon. Every social group built on weapon hierarchy has its version of this moment. The one who desires what the dominant holds. The calculation that runs in the watching mind: could I take it? What would happen if I did? In a world with language, this calculation might produce words. The elder who reads the room without appearing to read the room, this character appears in every human society across every era. The one who says nothing, shows nothing, but misses nothing. Joran is that character. Where is RETH? This question, which every parent, every group elder, every social animal has asked in the dark hours, is prelinguistic in its urgency. The absence of a group member at night is a threat signal. The body recognizes it before the mind can frame it. The secret practice. The private training that happens in the dark, before witnesses arrive, before the hierarchy is watching. This is where the most important psychological work happens in weapon-carrying societies. The one who wants the weapon practices when no one can see the mistakes. The moment when the dominant watches the challenger practice, without the challenger knowing, is one of the most psychologically loaded moments in social hierarchies. Because in that moment, the dominant must make an assessment: is this a threat? Is this a contribution to the group? This is the choice Kale makes, to teach rather than to suppress. And this choice, this particular psychological disposition, may be what separated successful hominid groups from failed ones. The groups whose dominant members felt secure enough to invest in the next generation's weapons skill were the groups that survived. Strangers carrying weapons were never neutral information. Every unknown group in the landscape was a threat calculation first. A potential resource second. A potential ally, if ever, Third, the threat calculation happened faster and more thoroughly than any other cognitive process these hominids performed. It was not intellectual. The pause before action. Researchers studying threat response in modern humans have identified a specific neural delay, a fraction of a second, between the amygdala's threat signal and the prefrontal cortex's override assessment. In that tiny gap, the animal response and the reasoning response compete. For most of human prehistory, there was very little in the cortex to compete with the amygdala's signal. The non-event. The threat that resolved without contact. How many times, across the 500,000 years of pre-linguistic weapon culture, did this happen? Two groups in the same landscape, each aware of the other, each carrying weapons, each making threat assessments, and each choosing, separately, to avoid the encounter. The arrangement of weapons in sequence by age is one of the most extraordinary things Joran does. Without language, Joran has created a physical timeline. A non-verbal history. Each stone point is a story, a hunt, a confrontation, a season, a loss. The oldest stone, nearly smooth, perhaps it belonged to Gorn's teacher, the elder who showed Joran what Joran is now showing Reth. Hold the oldest tool and understand, someone made this. Someone's hands shaped this stone with intention, with skill, with the same cognitive process that Reth is using now. That person is gone. The weapon remains. Collective action without language. A storm arrives, and without instruction, without a plan, without a leader calling orders, the group responds. Each member reading the environment and the other members simultaneously, each acting on a role that was established long ago through the social structure that weapons created. Kale stands watch, that is Kale's role, defined by the weapon, by the dominance hierarchy. The storm reveals something that normal days conceal. In the cave, pressed together by the weather, the group's emotional lives are visible. Kale's presence at the center, the weapon nearby, creates a zone of psychological safety around which the others arrange themselves. Not consciously. Not deliberately. Through the accumulated learning of thousands of days and nights in this group. What did grief look like in a mind that had no word for it? What did the fear of loss feel like when you could not say the name of the thing you were afraid of losing? Modern psychology identifies a particular condition called alexithymia, the inability to identify and describe emotional states in words, as a significant source of psychological distress. There is one more bizarre and haunting fact that researchers have pieced together from the archaeological and neurological evidence. The brains of these early hominids, shaped by 500,000 years of weapon priority psychology, were wired for threat more than for wonder. The regions of the brain most developed in these populations were the regions associated with spatial awareness, threat detection, physical coordination, and social hierarchy. The transmission of responsibility. The moment when the elder indicates that what has been carried for a lifetime will soon need to be carried by another. This happens before language. Before formal ceremony. Before any of the rituals that human cultures would develop to mark these transitions. It happens in a look. In a tap on the chest. The group accommodates its slowest member. This is one of the most remarkable behavioral patterns in early hominid social structure, and it directly contradicts the popular image of prehistoric life as a brutal survival of the fittest competition where the weak were discarded. The evidence in the fossil record is different. Healed fractures. Elderly individuals with significant mobility impairment whose survival depended on group support. The spatial memory of a hominid who has ranged this landscape for 50 years contains information that cannot be transferred in any pre-linguistic way except by demonstration. Joran knows this rock holds water after heavy rain because Joran has seen it before, perhaps many times, across many storm cycles, across decades of returning to this place. The steadying arm. Automatic. Unreflective. Not a decision but a reflex trained by proximity and care over many shared months and years. This gesture, the arm that goes out before the conscious mind has formulated the thought, is prelinguistic care. Prelinguistic empathy in its purest, most unadorned form. It exists before the word care was invented. Before the word empathy had any shape. Before love was ever named. What does an aging body feel like in a world that has no medicine, no concept of healing beyond rest and basic wound care, and no language with which to describe pain? Gorn's body is telling its own story in the language that all bodies use, the language of slowing, of holding tighter, of conserving. The walking stick is Gorn's weapon now. Reduced from the hunting spear of earlier years to this, a support, a balance tool, a presence more symbolic than functional. But the hand still rests on it. The body still maintains its relationship to the tool. This is one of the most quietly devastating details in the story of a weapon-defined psychology. The weapon gives identity. In every human culture without exception, across every continent and every era we have evidence of, there exist elders who have moved through all the active roles of the weapon-carrying life and arrived at this moment, the morning vigil, the facing of the east, the sitting in the quality of presence that only the very old, very tired, and very wise can produce. The posture of Joran now is not defeat. It is completion. The death of an elder in a pre-linguistic group was a catastrophe of a specific and unusual kind. Not just the grief, the wordless, uncontained grief of losing someone whose presence had organized the world for decades. But also the practical catastrophe. The spatial memory. The pattern recognition. They do not have a word for what is happening. They do not have a word for death. They do not have a ritual for it, not yet, not the elaborate rituals that would come much later when language and symbol-making and religious thinking had developed enough to construct meaning around the end of a life. All they have is the fire. Reth touches the walking stick. Not to take it, not yet. To touch the thing that was Gorn's. To make contact with the object that held the weight of that life. This is pre-linguistic grief. Pre-linguistic continuity. The touch that says, you were here. This was yours. I am here now. I will carry what you carried. The weapon as memorial. The weapon as inheritance. After the death of the elder, the social structure of the group is under the most intense stress it can face. The center of accumulated knowledge is gone. The hierarchy must redistribute. And the redistribution happens not through discussion or negotiation or election. It happens through presence. Through who stands where. Through who carries what. Reth stands beside Kale now, not behind. Reth adds to what Joran began. This is the moment of cultural transmission. The tradition continues not because anyone decided it should, not because there was a rule or a ritual to enforce it, but because Reth watched and absorbed and understood, in the body, in the gut, in the hands, what Joran was doing with those stones. The group finds its new shape. After every loss, after every shift in the weapon-based hierarchy, the group reorganizes, not by choice, not by plan, but by the gravitational pull of capability, trust, and accumulated relationship. And here is where the story of the species that invented weapons before language reveals its deepest truth. The weapons did not only make these beings more dangerous. The weapons made them more capable. The manufacturing of weapons built the prefrontal cortex that would eventually build language. The cooperative hunting that weapons required built the social intelligence that would eventually build culture. Weeks pass. The group continues. The landscape does not change. The threats do not diminish. Other groups cross the savannah. Predators move at night. The seasons shift in their ancient cycle, each demanding adaptation without a word of discussion. And through all of it, the weapons are maintained. The watch is kept. The fire is held. Reth found the place again. The place Joran knew. The place that holds water after rain. Reth sits in Gorn's spot and sees what Joran saw, perhaps many times, across 40 years of ranging this landscape. And something happens in Reth's mind that has no name yet, a kind of reaching backward through time, toward the person who sat here before, the person whose stick now rests across Reth's knee. Every generation inherits the psychological legacy of the one before it. Kale has inherited the weapon psychology of the generation that made the weapons Kale was shown as a young one. RETH is now inheriting the same. And what they are inheriting is not just skill. Not just knowledge. It is a way of being in the world, vigilant, threat-aware, hierarchy-conscious, tool-dependent, that was built before a single word existed to describe it. They leave. This is how it happened. Across hundreds of thousands of years, the groups moved. Followed the resources. Followed the seasonal patterns that the elders' accumulated knowledge described, and that the next generation now carries in embodied memory. And as they moved, they carried everything that defined them. The weapons, first. Always the weapons, first. Because the weapons were survival. Were identity. Here is the final strange and haunting fact. Every human being alive today is descended from a group like this. From beings who moved across an enormous landscape, carrying weapons they made themselves, navigating a world they could not yet fully name. Every anxiety you have ever felt in a crowd of strangers, that is Kale's threat assessment, still running. Every time you have felt the pride of being the capable one, the one others look to, that is the weapon holder's neurological signature, still firing. This is what was built before language. Not the great cathedrals. Not the cities. Not the symphonies. This. The sharp point on the end of the ashwood shaft, bound with sinew and resin, carried in the hand of a being who cannot yet say its name. This is where we began. New territory. The same threat assessment, performed in new coordinates. The nervous system adapts its parameters but never its vigilance. This is one of the most enduring legacies of the pre-linguistic weapon psychology, the inability to fully relax in an unfamiliar environment. There is a particular quality of temporary safety that the pre-linguistic weapon psychology knows well. The good place, found today. The water, the shade, the food. The weapons within reach but not needed in this moment. This is the highest state of well-being these beings can access, not peace, not security, not the absence of threat, but the temporary, conditional respite from it. The good place, for now. A new fire in a new place with the same people. Same weapons. Same configuration. Same ancient grammar of the group around the light. The place changes. The landscape changes. The season changes. The weapons need maintenance. The food changes. The threats change in their specific form. But this, the fire, the group, the weapons at the edge, the darkness held back, this does not change. This is the constant. What is RETH thinking? We cannot know. There was no language to record it, no art to express it, no way for RETH to tell us. But the brain state is legible to us across the hundreds of thousands of years between us, because it is our brain state too. The fire-watching contemplative state, the mildly hypnotic absorption in the moving light, the downward turn of conscious attention, the quality of presence without task, is universal in humans. RETH keeps the watch now. Where Joran once sat, RETH sits. Where Joran once held the night against the dark with the presence of a body and a weapon, RETH holds it. And the darkness is the same darkness. The same animal sounds. The same insect pulse. Dawn. After every night, it comes. After every darkness held at bay by a weapon and a watcher and a nearly burned fire, the light returns. This is perhaps the first great recurring miracle that these beings experienced. Not as miracle, they had no concept for that. But as the thing that follows the dark thing. The reliable return of the light after the terrible return of the dark. They stand on the ridge and look at the world below. A world that has no name. A world that is purely physical, purely immediate, purely present. They cannot wonder if the world is beautiful in any language. They cannot tell each other what they see. They can only stand in it together, weapons in hand, in the configuration that weapons made necessary and habit made natural, and look at the enormous unnamed world they are moving through. This is what it was like to be here, at the beginning. This is what it was like to be us, before we were us. And this is the moment, this wordless exchange on the ridge between the one who taught and the one who learned, between the generation that is passing and the generation that is arriving, that contains everything. Everything that language would later be invented to say. Every complex emotion, every social contract, every acknowledgement of debt and gratitude and respect and passing of power, compressed into a look between two beings who cannot say any of it. The look is the word. We began with a sharp stone and no words for it. We end with a world that cannot stop talking, that generates billions of words every single day, in hundreds of languages, across every surface and screen and network that human ingenuity has created. And beneath every single one of those words, beneath this word, right now, in your mind, the pre-linguistic weapon psychology is still running. The threat assessment. The hierarchy calculation. The territorial impulse. The group attachment that says these people are mine. The vigilance that never fully rests. The hand that tightens in the dark.